Article 3, Section 1. The judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time ordain and establish. The judges, both of the Supreme and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior and shall, at stated times, receive for their services a compensation which shall not be diminished during their continuance in office. Supreme Court, we should have one of those.
Well, it's unlike the other two. These are pretty much there you go, and yes, this is it.
Yeah, the thing is you can tell where there was the most debate during the Constitutional Convention by how long the section about it is. Because when there was disagreement, they wanted to make sure the office was exactly the way everyone agreed it was going to be. But there was no disagreement that there needed to be courts. You know, you can't run a country with no judiciary. It just doesn't work. There are people who want it to, but there's always going to be disagreements, at minimum. There's always going to be disagreements that need a third-party arbiter. Now, I personally am of the opinion that we're never going to be free of crime. We can reduce it with proper, poverty alleviating social safety nets, and there are a lot of ways we can reduce recidivism that we're not doing and things along those lines. But it's always going to be there, and there's always going to need to be a system to deal with it. And in the 18th century, the judicial system was much worse, much harsher than it is now. Like, I don't know how many crimes were death penalty offenses in England in those days, but it was a lot. And transporting was still a thing, and just the court system in the 18th century was insane, and we didn't really have a concept of prisons the way we do now. There were prisons, but you would have to pay to get special treatment, and you could pay to get special treatment. And, very seldom did people have extended prison sentences because either you got flogged, transported, or hanged for most offenses. So it was very different then.
Yeah, wasn't Georgia a prison for a while?
Georgia was a penal colony for a while, and then Australia was one for an even longer time. And the other colonies had a certain number of, at bare minimum, you get indentured servants sometimes out of the prisons. People who had done minor offenses could be given the opportunity to go to the Americas in punishment for their crime. And in theory, they could come back. It was a lot easier to come back from the colonies than it would be to come back from Australia. But the point is that, what we think of as how crime is dealt with is very, very different from how it was dealt with in the 18th century. A lot of basic aspects of the modern legal system just didn't exist. There's I think it's a BBC series about one of the first ever defense attorneys in British law. So, the legal system was a different thing, but it was still a thing. John Adams himself had been the defense attorney for the soldiers during the Boston Massacre and got them acquitted by saying they were, firing in self-defense.
All right, so, but who makes the laws and who executes the laws were like a highly debated topic and how they do that, but they had no problem with the courts to make sure that we had one.
Yeah, There needed to be a court. Everyone agreed with that. There wasn't a lot of debate. And so the sections on the court are much, much shorter because there wasn't all the fighting.
Little do they know how much the power the court would have later on.
Well, the idea that the court can overturn law is not in the Constitution. The idea that the Supreme Court is the ultimate arbiter of what is and isn't constitutional is itself technically not constitutional. And I used to know a guy who argued against it, said it shouldn't have happened, and who let that happen? And the answer is, well, the first Supreme Court justice, or the first Chief Justice, was like, somebody's got to do it. It's going to be us. But judicial review, which is what that's called, is not in the Constitution anywhere. The Supreme Court has, for centuries now, basically made its own power. And a lot of the problems we're having in the Supreme Court these days are because there's nothing limiting what the problems are in the Constitution, because there's so little in the Constitution about the court at all.
All right. Also, it says in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts.
Yeah. Now, in this case, that doesn't mean, crappy courts. That just means lower courts. Superior and inferior, literally higher and lower. That's all we're talking here. Because they knew that there needed to be more than one court for the entire country, even at a federal level. Even, 2.5 centuries ago, when the country had a much smaller population, when the travel time was considerably longer, you needed multiple federal courts in order to keep the system running. And so you have the Superior Court, which is the one in charge, and then any other, what we now would call district courts under that.
Like one federal court per state?
Well, the country's divided into federal districts. And I don't know how long that's been a thing. So I will look that up real quick. Yes, I'm in the Western District. Thank you. I know that. The Western District of Washington. Yes, I know. There are 13 circuit courts. And in those days, they were called circuit courts because there would be a judge who would literally ride around their area on a circuit. My circuit is sodding huge. It covers Washington, Oregon, Montana, Idaho, California, Nevada, Arizona, Alaska, Hawaii, Guam, and what is it, the Mariana Islands, I think? MP, whatever that's short for. So it's massive. Covers the largest territory of any district, and probably a pretty substantial population.
Wow. So that's the last stop before the Supreme Court for you.
Yes. Would be the 9th district. Below the 9th district, there are a total of 94 lower district courts. That includes, for the territories, at least one for every state, for DC and for Puerto Rico. My state actually has 2, conveniently divided by the mountains. Weirdly, Oregon does not. Oregon only has 1. So, I don't know, maybe we have more population than they do.
Maybe the mountains are just that bad in your state.
Yeah. Apparently, American Samoa does not have a district court or federal territorial court, and so they go to either DC or Hawaii. So yeah, so the whole system is divided by smaller and smaller amounts. The largest by population is the Central District of California because it's LA County, or the Greater Los Angeles area, which isn't even just LA County. It's Greater Los Angeles, which I grew up in, is freaking massive. It's all or part of Los Angeles County, Orange County, Ventura County, San Bernardino County, and Riverside County. It's huge both in size and population, and it is all one district court. So that is the busiest one in the country.
It says
New York is divided in half.
the city or the state? City or state?
City. Southern District of New York is Manhattan, the Bronx, and Westchester County. Eastern District is Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, Nassau County, and Suffolk County. So, yeah.
And finally, it says they shall hold their offices during good behavior.
Yes. I have feelings. The problem is good behavior isn't defined. And getting anyone thrown off the court for bad behavior is regrettably partisan. I would like to think that everyone could agree that literally taking gifts from people who are routinely involved in Supreme Court cases is not good behavior.
Well, what do you know, apparently?
What do I know? 2 of our Supreme Court justices have wives who've actively encouraged insurrection, but what do I know? Like, I have strong feelings about this.
And they'll get paid for doing stuff.
And they get paid for doing it, so yeah. Now, I'm going to emphasize that we do not pay our Supreme Court justices as much as they could probably make in private practice as lawyers. You know, it's not like, what do they make? Supreme Court justices make currently $255,495 a year. Or that's what the Chief Justice makes. Apparently, and the lower justices get like $3,500 less. Oh no, is that Washington State? No, I think that is, yeah, that is national by the look of it. Yeah. So,
well, either way, that's more than I make.
It is a lot more than I make too. Okay. Supreme Court, John Roberts makes about $312,000 a year. If the page that I have found is correct for the current federal court. That one might have been my state court. And the other justices make just shy of $300,000. Which I admit is nearly 100 times more than the justices made in 1789.
No wonder they take gifts and bribes. You can't live on that salary.
I mean, it's a lot. I'm not denying that it's a lot. And it's a lot more than most of the U.S. population is ever going to make. But relative to what other high-end lawyers make, it's not actually as much as it sounds. Now, part of that is that other high-end lawyers overpaid. But apparently, Clarence Thomas is fairly open about the fact that he could be making more in private practice. Which by all means, go off and do that and stop being a Supreme Court justice. But, it is a conversation that needs to be had, is not just, wow, they make a ton, because, wow, they make a ton, but, if we paid less, would we attract better people? And I don't think we would. Now, also the problem is that Supreme Court justices are appointed by the president, so that's its own whole issue.
Yeah.
It's got to be somebody who is well enough known to have the president aware of them. I served jury duty like a year and change ago, 2 years, whatever it was, and the judge there was very, very nice, and she's never going to be a Supreme Court justice because nobody knows this woman. It has to be somebody who comes to the attention of, at the very least, the party to get recommended to the president. But I have no sympathy for someone making $300,000 a year complaining that it's not enough to live on.
I guess rent in Washington is just that expensive, apparently.
Oh, boy. Well, Washington, D.C. was never supposed to be a city that people lived in. That wasn't really what it was designed for. But you can't have a city that no one actually lives in, so it now has an actual population, and some parts of the city are considerably better off than others.
But I guess the price you pay, low. You might get low payment, but you can control the power. You control the future of the country.
Yeah, I mean it's all a balance.
Yep. And speaking of that, we'll be talking about that soon enough.
Yep.